There is a specific kind of pressure that doesn't announce itself loudly. It's the quiet tightening in your chest the night before a decision you can't undo, the deal that could collapse, the conversation you've rehearsed 40 times, the number on the screen that won't move the way you need it to. And in that moment, most people make the same mistake. They try to control it, all of it. They grip harder. They run the scenarios again. They lie awake bargaining with outcomes that were never theirs to command in the first place. And the strange thing is, the harder they grip, the worse they perform. They become slower, more reactive, easier to rattle. The very effort to control everything is what costs them their composure. Now watch someone who operates at the highest level under real stakes. A fighter, a surgeon, a founder who has been through 3 near-death moments with their company. They do something that looks almost like indifference, but isn't. They've already accepted the parts they can't move, the punch that might land, the market that might turn, the person who might say no. They made peace with those before they ever stepped in. And because they're not spending energy fighting reality, they have all of it left for the part that actually responds to effort. This is the difference between people who crumble under pressure and people who get sharper. It isn't talent. It isn't toughness in the way most people imagine it. It's a precise, trained relationship with control, knowing exactly what's yours to decide and refusing to bleed energy over what isn't. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around this 2,000 years ago, and fighters have been living it for centuries without ever reading a word of it. So here are 5 things composed people understand about accepting what they can't control, and why each one makes you more effective when the pressure is highest, not less. The first thing composed people understand is that the most important work happens before the moment of pressure ever arrives, not during it, before. Ask any experienced fighter when the fight is won, and the honest ones won't point to the knockout. They'll point to the months of preparation and then to a quieter moment, the walk to the ring, the seconds in the corner. When they decided in advance how they were going to meet whatever came. They accepted ahead of time that they would get hit, that the plan might fall apart in the first 30 seconds, that their opponent gets a say in what happens. This sounds like pessimism. It's the opposite. When you've already accepted that things can go wrong, a setback in the moment isn't a shock that hijacks your nervous system. It's just information, something to respond to. The person who walked in believing everything would go to plan is the one who freezes when it doesn't, because reality just contradicted the story they were holding on to. Epictetus, who was born a slave and understood control better than most free men ever will, put it simply. Some things are within our power and some things are not. Within our power are our judgments, our choices, our responses. Outside it are outcomes, other people, the dice of circumstance. He argued that nearly all human suffering comes from confusing the two, from trying to command what we can't, and neglecting what we can. Apply this before you walk into pressure, not during it. Before the negotiation, separate it cleanly. You control your preparation, your clarity, your willingness to walk away. You do not control whether they say yes. Before the launch, you control the quality of the work and how you respond to feedback. You do not control how the market receives it on day one. When you do this honestly in advance, something shifts. The outcome stops being a threat hanging over your head and becomes simply the result of a process you've already committed to fully. You walk in lighter because you're no longer carrying the weight of trying to control things that were never yours to carry. The amateur tries to guarantee the result. The professional guarantees the effort and accepts the result. And that acceptance, decided early, is what lets them stay loose when the real moment comes. The second principle is about energy, and it's the one most people get backwards. There's a belief, especially among ambitious people, that struggling against a bad situation is a sign of strength. That if you're not fighting reality with everything you have, you've given up. But watch what actually happens to someone in a crisis who refuses to accept the situation they're in. The founder whose biggest client just walked, who spends 3 days furious, replaying the meeting, insisting it shouldn't have happened, that it isn't fair, that this can't be real. Every one of those hours is fuel, and he's burning all of it on the one thing he cannot change, the fact that it already happened. Compare that to the person who absorbs the blow in an afternoon, who says clearly and without drama, this is the situation now, and starts from there. The second person isn't tougher in some heroic sense. They've just refused to waste energy on resistance, which leaves them with a full tank for the part that matters, the response. There's a useful image from martial arts here. A skilled grappler doesn't meet force with equal force, because that's exhausting, and you'll lose to anyone stronger. They accept the direction of the force and redirect it. Acceptance, in this sense, isn't weakness. It's the most efficient possible use of your strength. You stop pushing against the wall and start looking for the door. Marcus Aurelius, who ran the entire Roman Empire through plague, war, and betrayal, wrote a private note to himself that captures it. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't being poetic. He was reminding himself, in the middle of genuine crisis, that the obstacle in front of him was not an interruption of his work. It was the work. The fire you're standing in is the situation you now have to operate in, so operate. The practical version of this is almost embarrassingly simple. When something goes wrong, notice how long you spend in the phase of wishing it hadn't. That phase feels productive. It is the least productive thing you will do all day. The faster you can say the words, "This is what's true now," the faster your full capacity comes back online. Composed people aren't the ones who feel less frustration. They're the ones who spend far less time there because they've learned that resistance is a tax on the exact resource they need most when the pressure is on. The third thing composed people understand is why people freeze in the first place. We treat freezing like a mystery, like some random failure of nerve. It isn't. People freeze for a very specific reason. They're trying to control the outcome at the exact moment they should be focused on the action. Think about a free throw shooter in the final seconds of a close game. The shot itself is something he has practiced 10,000 times. His body knows how to do it. But in that moment, his mind leaves the action and jumps to the outcome. What happens if I miss? What everyone will think? What this means? And the outcome is precisely the thing he doesn't control once the ball leaves his hands. By fixating on it, he pulls his attention away from the only thing he does control, the mechanics of this single shot. That's the freeze. It's not weakness. It's attention pointed at the wrong target. High performers train themselves to do the reverse. Under the most pressure, they narrow their focus down to the smallest controllable action in front of them. Not the championship. The next breath. Not the company's survival. The next email. The next call. The next honest decision. A surgeon doesn't operate by thinking about whether the patient lives. He thinks about this incision, this suture, this next precise movement. The outcome takes care of itself as the byproduct of 1,000 controlled actions, and it cannot be commanded directly. The Stoics had a phrase for this. They distinguished between the archer's aim and the arrow's flight. You control how you draw the bow, your stance, your release, the years of practice in your hands. Once the arrow leaves, the wind has its say. A gust can take it off target through no fault of yours. So the wise archer, they said, takes complete responsibility for the shot and complete acceptance of the flight. He gives everything to what's his and nothing to anxiety over what isn't. This reframes performance entirely. Your job under pressure is never to control the result. It's to execute the controllable action as well as you possibly can, and then to let the result be what it is. When you fully accept that the outcome is not yours to command, a strange calm arrives, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally aimed your attention at something you can actually move. The pressure doesn't disappear. It just stops being paralyzing because you've given it nowhere to grip. You're no longer trying to force the arrow's flight. You're just making the cleanest possible shot, again and again, and trusting that this is the only thing that ever actually worked. The fourth principle is the hardest to accept because it strips away our favorite excuse. When the pressure breaks us, we almost always blame the source, the difficult client, the unfair competitor, the market, the person who attacked us in the meeting. It feels obvious that they are the problem. They're the ones causing the stress, after all. But composed people operate from a different and far more useful belief. The external event is never what determines your state. Your judgment of it is. Two people can face the identical hostile situation. One is destabilized for a week. The other treats it as a normal cost of doing serious work and is fine by dinner. The situation was the same. The difference was entirely internal. Epictetus stated this as directly as it can be stated. People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of things. Notice what this does. It doesn't deny that the event happened or that it was genuinely hard. It relocates your power. If the event controlled your state, you'd be permanently at the mercy of every rude email and every market swing. And you'd have to fix the entire world before you could ever be composed. But if your judgment is the deciding factor, then the one thing you actually control is the one thing that matters most. A fighter understands this in his body. When an opponent taunts him, lands a cheap shot, tries to get under his skin, the entire purpose is to make him react emotionally, because an emotional fighter is a sloppy fighter who stops thinking and starts swinging. The composed fighter accepts the provocation as simply part of the game, refuses to hand over his internal state, and keeps executing his plan. He's not pretending the provocation didn't happen. He's denying it the power to control him. This is not about suppressing what you feel. Suppression is just resistance wearing a calm mask, and it leaks out under pressure. It's about creating a gap, a small trained pause between what happens and how you respond. In that gap lies every bit of freedom you have. The person without it is a machine. Input, automatic reaction, every time. The person who builds it gets to choose. Viktor Frankl, who survived the worst conditions a human can survive, located ultimate human freedom in exactly this space, between stimulus and response. You can't always control the stimulus, the harsh feedback, the lost deal, the person who let you down. But the response is yours, and accepting that it's yours means you can no longer outsource your composure to other people's behavior. That's a heavy responsibility. It's also the only real path to staying steady when the people and events around you are doing everything they can to knock you off balance. The fifth principle exists to correct the most dangerous misunderstanding about everything we've covered. When people hear accept what you can't control, a part of them hears give up. Stop trying. Go limp and let life happen to you. And if that were true, this whole philosophy would produce passive, defeated people. But look at who actually lived it. Marcus Aurelius didn't accept his way into doing nothing. He ran an empire through decades of relentless crisis. Fighters who master this don't fight less. They fight with more clarity and less wasted motion. Acceptance, properly understood, is not the end of action. It's the precondition for effective action. Here's the distinction that matters. Acceptance is about reality as it is right now, in this moment. It says, this is the situation I'm actually in, not the one I wish I were in, not the one I think I deserve. Action is about what you do next, from that honest starting point. The mistake people make is trying to act on a situation they haven't accepted. They're still arguing with the facts, still half believing it shouldn't be this way, and so every move they make is built on a foundation of denial. They're solving the problem they wish they had instead of the one in front of them. The Stoics were never passive. They were among the most engaged people of their era, generals, statesmen, emperors, men of genuine responsibility. Their acceptance of fate was never an excuse to disengage. It was the clear-eyed starting line for doing the work in front of them as well as it could be done. They had a phrase for it: to love your fate. Not to merely tolerate what happens, but to fully accept it as the actual material you have to work with, and then to work it with everything you've got. So the sequence is precise, and the order cannot be reversed. First, accept reality exactly as it is. No negotiating, no story about how it should be different. This clears the noise and frees your energy. Second, identify the narrow slice you actually control within that reality. Third, pour your full effort into that slice and release your grip on the rest. The person who skips step 1 and jumps straight to effort is the one who burns out fighting walls. The person who stops at step 1 and never reaches the action is the one who mistakes acceptance for surrender. Composed performers hold both at once, in the right order. They see the situation with brutal clarity. They accept it without flinching, and then they act on it with everything they have, precisely because they're no longer wasting a single ounce of themselves wishing it were something else. That is what calm under pressure actually is. Not the absence of stakes, not pretending it doesn't matter. It's the quiet, trained refusal to fight reality so that all of your strength is available for the only thing that ever moves it: the next right action. Put these 5 together and you start to see the shape of a particular kind of person. Someone who decides how they'll meet pressure before it arrives, so the moment never catches them defenseless. Someone who refuses to waste energy resisting what's already happened, keeping their full strength for the response. Someone who narrows their focus to the controllable action when the stakes are highest, instead of freezing on an outcome they can't command. Someone who guards the gap between what happens and how they react, and never hands their composure to other people's behavior. And someone who treats acceptance not as surrender, but as the clear ground they stand on to act with everything they have. This is not a personality you're either born with or not. Every one of these is trainable. It starts small, noticing how long you spend wishing a setback hadn't happened, catching the moment your attention jumps from the action to the outcome, building 1 second of pause before you react to the thing that just got under your skin. The composure of a fighter, a surgeon, a leader who stays steady when everyone else is unraveling, is not a gift. It's the accumulated result of practicing this distinction 10,000 times until it becomes who you are. The world will keep handing you things you cannot control. The deal that falls through, the person who lets you down, the moment that doesn't go your way. That part isn't optional. What is optional, what is entirely, permanently yours, is whether you spend your life fighting that reality or working with it. Accept what you can't control, not because you've given up, but because it's the only way to free up everything you need to handle what comes next. The calm isn't something you wait to feel. It's something you build, one accepted reality at a time, until pressure stops being the thing that breaks you and becomes the thing that reveals exactly how composed you've trained yourself to be.